December 7, 1941, Oahu, Hawaii. The morning sun rises slowly over the Pacific, casting golden light across the palm trees and the still waters of Pearl Harbor. On Ford Island, sailors from the USS Arizona and West Virginia are just beginning to stir. Church bells ring faintly in the distance. It is a Sunday, peaceful, ordinary, warm. Seaman First Class George Walters wipes grease from his hands as he looks out across the harbor. Battleships sit proudly at anchor in Battleship Row. California, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Nevada, and Arizona. The pride of the Pacific Fleet. Overhead, the sky is impossibly blue. On the nearby airfield at Wheeler Army Air Base, mechanics work lazily on P-40 fighters. Some of the men are still in their undershirts, laughing about last night's poker game. One, a young lieutenant named Kenneth Taylor, is asleep after a long night out. The war raging across Europe and Asia feels a world away. But high above, beyond the northern horizon, the first formation of Japanese aircraft is already approaching. At 6 a.m., aboard 6 Japanese carriers, Ekadi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, Admiral Kyuchi Nagamo's strike force prepares to launch. 353 planes, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters. Their mission, planned for months under total secrecy, is about to begin. Below deck, pilots check maps one last time. Many have painted the rising sun on their flight helmets. Commander Mitsuo Fukita, leading the first wave, looks down at his watch. 6:10 a.m. He raises his arm. Hajime! Begin. Engines roar to life in a deafening wave. The carrier's decks tremble. One by one, the planes lift off into the dawn sky, disappearing into the clouds. By 7:15 a.m., they have sighted the northern tip of Oahu. Fujita's radio man sends the first coded message back to the fleet. Tora! Tora! Tiger! 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 It is the signal that complete surprise has been achieved. Back in Pearl Harbor, the sailors remain unaware. On the Arizona, the ship's band is tuning up for the morning flag-raising ceremony. The American flag flutters lazily in the tropical breeze. Aboard a small radar station at Opana Point, 2 young privates, George Elliott and Joseph Lockard, see something unusual on their screen. A large blip, closing fast. They call it in. The officer on duty shrugs. Probably a flight of B-17s coming in from the mainland. The warning is dismissed. Minutes later, the first wave of Japanese aircraft descends through the clouds. At 7:48 a.m., Mitsuo Fukita gives the command, Tatsugeki. Attack! From the south, torpedo bombers sweep low over the water, engines screaming. The serenity of the morning shatters in an instant as the first bombs fall. Explosions rip through Battleship Row. A torpedo slams into the side of the West Virginia, sending a column of water and steel high into the air. On the Oklahoma, sailors are thrown from their bunks. Aboard the Arizona, a bomb pierces the forward magazine. For a fraction of a second, there is silence. Then, a blinding white flash. The battleship erupts in a massive explosion, a fireball towering hundreds of feet into the sky. The blast is felt miles away. Men are hurled into the harbor. The air fills with oil, smoke, and screams. George Walters grabs the nearest hose line, trying desperately to fight the inferno. "Get those lines over here!" He shouts, but the hoses sputter, no pressure. The fire is too much. Above, Japanese Zero fighters strafe the airfields, cutting down men as they run to their planes. Wheeler, Hickam, Kaneo, all are engulfed in chaos. On the ground, Private Joseph MacDonald takes cover behind a sandbag wall as bullets tear through the air. "What the hell's going on?" someone yells. MacDonald doesn't know. None of them do. Within minutes, paradise has turned to hell. At 7:55 a.m., the air above Oahu roars with engines. The first wave has struck, and now the second follows. 171 more Japanese aircraft sweeping in from the north. Smoke blankets the harbor. The air stinks of burning oil and molten steel. The once proud Arizona burns furiously, its hull torn open. Bodies and debris litter the blackened water. Across the harbor, the Nevada's crew manages to get steam up. She lurches forward, her bow already scarred by a torpedo hit. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander Thomas M. Thomas, shouts from the bridge, "Get her to sea! Keep firing!" The ship's 5-inch guns open up, thundering into the sky. But the Japanese pilots, trained relentlessly for this moment, adjust with deadly precision. Dive bombers peel off one by one, targeting the moving battleship. Bombs explode along her deck, showering the men with steel and fire. The Nevada's forward section is ablaze, yet she pushes onward, defiant, until her crew beaches her deliberately to prevent blocking the harbor channel. Nearby, on Ford Island, firefighters and sailors struggle side by side to rescue the wounded. One chaplain kneels beside a dying sailor, clutching his hand as flames reflect in his glasses. "You're going home, son," he whispers. At Hickam Field, chaos reigns. Rows of P-40 fighters sit neatly lined up, easy targets. Japanese strafing runs rake the tarmac. Planes explode in chains of orange fireballs. Pilots who try to reach their aircraft are cut down instantly. Lieutenants Kenneth Taylor and George Welch, the only two American pilots able to respond, sprint for their cars and drive to Haliwa Auxiliary Field, 20 miles away. Their two P-40s are fueled and armed. By 8:30 a.m., they're airborne, the only fighters in the sky. Over Oahu, Taylor spots a formation of Japanese bombers. He pushes the throttle forward. "Let's get 'em!" The P-40 dives. Machine guns chatter, tracers ripping through the air. A Japanese Val bomber bursts into flame. Welch rolls hard right, chasing another. The two young men fight until their ammunition runs dry. Against impossible odds, they shoot down at least 6 enemy aircraft. Below them, the island is still burning. On the Oklahoma, trapped sailors pound desperately from inside the overturned hull. Rescuers can hear them, tapping muffled cries. Men swarm the deck with hammers and torches, trying to cut through steel while fuel and oil burn around them. Some of those trapped below tap until the next day. Many will never make it out. Meanwhile, aboard the Japanese flagship Akagi, Admiral Nagamo receives Fuchida's message. The attack has been devastating. But Fuchida urges a third wave to destroy the dry docks, oil storage, and repair yards. Nagamo hesitates. The location of the American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, is unknown. To linger risks counterattack. After brief deliberation, he gives the order. All planes, return to the fleet. At 9:45 a.m., the last Japanese aircraft wheel away, vanishing back over the ocean. Silence slowly returns, broken only by the hiss of fire hoses and the cries of the wounded. Smoke still billows skyward, turning the tropical morning to twilight. The harbor surface is slick with oil and dotted with lifeboats, wreckage, and human forms. By noon, the attack is over. In less than 2 hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet has been crippled, 8 battleships damaged or sunk, 188 aircraft destroyed, over 2,400 Americans killed at 12:30 p.m. The rescue operations begin in earnest. Sailors use makeshift rafts to reach the wrecks. Divers descend into the dark halls, searching for survivors. Inside the Arizona, there are none. Her dead will remain entombed below deck, 1,177 men in all. From Honolulu, emergency hospitals overflow. Nurses move between cots as wounded sailors whisper for water, morphine, or word of their friends. The smell of iodine mingles with smoke from the still-burning ships. That night, the fires continue to glow on the horizon. Across Oahu, survivors sit silently, staring toward the harbor. The sound of crackling flames mixes with the surf. In Japan, radio broadcasts proclaim a glorious victory. Admiral Yamamoto, who conceived the attack, stands silently aboard his flagship Nagato. His officers cheer, but he does not. "I fear," he murmurs, "all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." December 8, 1941. Washington, D.C. The morning air is cold, gray, heavy with disbelief. Newspapers hit the streets with a single word in bold letters: war. Across the country, radios blare the same grim report. The U.S. Pacific Fleet has been struck at Pearl Harbor. The casualty lists are growing by the hour. In the White House, President Franklin D. Roosevelt sits in his wheelchair, a blanket across his knees. His face is pale, lined with exhaustion. He has barely slept. The night before, messages had poured in, frantic, fragmented reports from Hawaii. Now the facts are clear. America has been attacked without warning. Roosevelt turns to his aides. "We must speak to Congress at once." At 12:30 p.m., he enters the House chamber. Every seat is filled. Thousands more stand outside the Capitol, listening through loudspeakers. The president grips his speech with trembling hands, a single page, carefully typed. His voice is calm, steady, and unforgettable. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Each word hits the chamber like gunfire. Reporters scribble furiously. Senators lean forward, silent. Roosevelt continues, outlining the devastation. Ships sunk, lives lost, the treachery of a nation that had been negotiating for peace even as its fleet steamed toward Hawaii. He concludes simply, No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. At 12:36 p.m., he requests a declaration of war against Japan. The vote is nearly unanimous. In the Senate, 82-0. In the House, 388-1. The lone dissenting vote, cast by Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin of Montana, the same woman who had voted against entering World War I, is met with jeers and shouting. Outside, crowds chant, "Remember Pearl Harbor." Across the nation, anger turns into resolve. Enlistment centers overflow. Lines stretch around city blocks, young men, farmers, factory workers, college students, all waiting to sign up. At one New York recruiting office, a Marine sergeant mutters, "We'll need every one of them." Factories roar to life. Aircraft plants in California and Michigan receive orders tripled overnight. In shipyards, welders and riveters work around the clock. Rosie the Riveter's poster will soon become a symbol of this new, relentless effort. In Hawaii, rescue work continues. Divers brave smoke and oil-slicked water to search for trapped men. On the Oklahoma, cutting teams drill through the hull, pulling out pockets of survivors. 32 men rescued after nearly 2 days entombed in darkness. But for most, there are only bodies. On Ford Island, chaplains stand amid rows of canvas-covered figures. The scent of diesel and death hangs heavy. Bugles play as the flag is raised again, now tattered and soot-stained. Sailors stand at attention, tears cutting through the grime on their faces. At the same time, Japanese diplomats in Washington are being escorted from the State Department. Their protestations of peace talks now ring hollow. In Tokyo, the government declares war on the United States and Britain, calling the attack a defensive action. But the reality is clear: a sleeping giant has awakened. In the weeks that follow, Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066, leading to the internment of over 110,000 Japanese Americans, a decision still debated to this day. Fear and fury drive policy as rumors of invasion swirl along the West Coast. The U.S. Navy counts its losses. The Arizona and Oklahoma are total wrecks. West Virginia, California, and Nevada are badly damaged. Yet remarkably, the aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, Saratoga, were not in port. Their survival will soon prove vital. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz arrives in Hawaii before Christmas to take command of the battered Pacific Fleet. Standing on the dock, he surveys the devastation, ships twisted, blackened, half-submerged. He says quietly, "The Japanese did us a favor. They didn't destroy our dry docks, our fuel, or our carriers." He knows what must come next. The United States will rebuild. And it will strike back. Late December 1941, Pearl Harbor. The fires are out, but the harbor still smolders. A thin layer of oil gleams on the water, shimmering black and red beneath the winter sun. The smell of fuel, salt, and decay lingers in the air, a reminder of that terrible morning. Divers from the Navy and civilian contractors now work around the clock. Their mission, to raise what can be saved. Underwater visibility is almost zero. Men grope through twisted steel and floating debris, guided only by the faint glow of their lamps. Some emerge pale and trembling, speaking of the silence beneath the wrecks. The silence of hundreds who will never surface. The Nevada has been refloated and towed for repairs. The West Virginia is patched and drained. The California will take months. The Arizona is beyond saving. Her hulk remains half-submerged, smoke still curling from her torn decks. Inside lie the remains of 1,177 sailors, a tomb that will never be disturbed. Above, cranes creak. Welding sparks light up the night. It is not just repair. It is resurrection. The Pacific Fleet must rise again. On the mainland, America shifts into total war. Shipyards in San Francisco and Puget Sound run day and night. Women join the workforce in numbers never seen before, building bombers, tanks, and Liberty ships. Propaganda posters line every street. Remember Pearl Harbor? Keep 'em flying. Roosevelt's new War Production Board converts the nation's economy almost overnight. Automobile factories now produce engines for bombers. Steel mills pour out armor plate. By spring 1942, America is the world's largest manufacturer of war materials. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan advances rapidly. In the weeks after Pearl Harbor, their forces overrun the Philippines, Hong Kong, Guam, Wake Island, and Singapore. The rising sun flies over half the Pacific. For the men who survived Pearl Harbor, the shock gives way to determination. On Ford Island, Petty Officer Joe George, one of the sailors who had thrown lines to save trapped men from the Arizona, writes to his mother, "We'll make it right, Ma. We'll get them back for what they did." The Navy agrees. In January 1942, Admiral Ernest J. King becomes Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet. His strategy is simple: rebuild, reorganize, retaliate. Aircraft carriers, once secondary to battleships, are now the heart of naval power. Carriers Enterprise, Hornet, Yorktown, and Lexington become symbols of America's new reach. Pilots train relentlessly across the Pacific, learning carrier takeoffs, torpedo runs, and dive-bombing tactics. Among them are men like Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Doolittle, a renowned aviator with a daring idea. If bombers could be launched from carriers, America might strike back at Japan's heart. The plan seems impossible until April 1942, when the USS Hornet sails west with 16 B-25 bombers lashed to her deck. The mission that follows, the Doolittle Raid, will not change the war's balance of power, but it will change its spirit. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, American bombs will fall on Tokyo. But for now, in the early months of 1942, Oahu is a place of ghosts. Every night, searchlights sweep the sky. Anti-aircraft guns stand ready. Families build shelters in their yards. The fear of another attack hangs heavy. Yet amid the ruins, the Navy's chaplains hold services over the harbor. On February 7, 1942, with the setting sun painting the waves gold, survivors of the Arizona gather at the pier. Chaplain Commander Howell Forgy, who had shouted, "Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition," during the attack stands before them. He speaks quietly. They gave their lives, not knowing what the dawn would bring. But from their sacrifice comes our purpose, and our promise, that the light of freedom shall not go out. Bugles sound. The men salute. Flags ripple in the Pacific breeze. Beyond the horizon, the same ocean that brought destruction now carries the American fleet toward its destiny. The war that began at Pearl Harbor is far from over. It has only begun. Spring 1942, Pacific Ocean. 4 months after the flames of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy sails again. The wounds are not healed, but the resolve is absolute. The sleeping giant, once stunned and bleeding, now begins to move. On April 18th, the aircraft carrier USS Hornet cuts through the rough northern Pacific. Her deck is crowded with 16 twin-engine B-25 Mitchell bombers, an impossible sight. These are land-based aircraft, far too large for carrier operations. But Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle has convinced his superiors that it can be done. His mission: strike the Japanese home islands. Before dawn, the crews gather on deck. Rain spits against their faces. The sea is heavy. Then word comes: a Japanese patrol vessel has spotted the task force. Admiral William F. Halsey makes the call: launch immediately. The bombers must take off 200 miles earlier than planned. It will mean little fuel for the return flight. Doolittle nods without hesitation. Let's go. One by one, the Mitchells lumber down the short deck. The boat dips with each launch, propellers biting into the wind. Sailors cheer as each plane claws its way skyward. The last bomber lifts off, wheels barely clearing the edge of the carrier. Hours later, Japan's cities awaken to the drone of American engines. For the first time in the war, Tokyo itself is under attack. Bombs fall on industrial targets, oil depots, shipyards, factories. The damage is limited, but the psychological impact is enormous. Japan, which had promised its people their islands were untouchable, now knows otherwise. Of the 16 bombers, 15 crash land or ditch after running out of fuel over China. One diverts to the Soviet Union. Many crewmen are captured. Some are executed. Doolittle believes the rate of failure until he returns home to a hero's welcome. Roosevelt publicly claims the bombers came from Shangri-La, a mythical land, to conceal the Hornets' involvement. The message is clear: America can strike back. But Japan's response is swift and deadly. Furious at the humiliation, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto plans to lure the American carriers into a decisive trap. His target, Midway Atoll, a tiny coral island halfway between Asia and North America. By June 1942, the stage is set for one of history's most pivotal naval battles. In Pearl Harbor, the scars still show, but so does the change. The wrecks of Arizona and Oklahoma remain as memorials, but the piers now bustle with new ships, new planes, and a new generation of sailors. Admiral Chester Nimitz walks the docks, greeting the men. This time, he tells them, we know what's coming. The codebreakers at Station HYPO, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, have intercepted Japanese transmissions. After weeks of painstaking analysis, they confirm Yamamoto's plan, a strike on AF. To be sure, they tricked the Japanese into revealing it by sending a false report that Midway's water condenser has failed. Hours later, an enemy message reads, AF is short on water. The trap is confirmed. Nimitz moves fast. He orders carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown to take position northeast of Midway. The battle will be fought in the open sea, carrier against carrier, a new kind of warfare where the ships never see each other, yet decide the fate of nations. June 4, 1942 dawn. From Akagi and her sister carriers, Japanese aircraft launch toward Midway Island, bombing airstrips and fuel depots. American Marines on the atoll fight back with anti-aircraft guns, filling the sky with black bursts of flak. Then the counterattack. American torpedo squadrons, flying outdated planes at low altitude, charge head-on into the Japanese formation. It is suicide. Nearly every plane is shot down. But their sacrifice pulls Japan's fighter cover low, leaving the sky above open. At 10:22 a.m., dive bombers from the Enterprise in Yorktown arrive unopposed. They roll over and descend almost vertically. The ocean rushes upward. In less than 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kage, and Tsuryu, are hit and engulfed in fire. Explosions ripple across their decks as aviation fuel and munitions ignite. The crews fight the flames with desperation, but it is hopeless. Hours later, a 4th carrier, Hiryu, meets the same fate. The Battle of Midway is over by sunset. Japan has lost 4 carriers, 248 aircraft, and its best pilots. A blow from which its navy will never recover. When the news reaches Pearl Harbor, the mood shifts. Sailors gather around radios, listening to bulletins in stunned silence. For the first time since that Black Sunday in December, they can believe in victory. In Washington, Roosevelt smiles faintly as he reads the reports. They started this war at Pearl Harbor, he says quietly. And now we've turned the tide. Summer 1942, Pearl Harbor. The harbor, once a graveyard of twisted metal and oil, now hums with life. Warships glide through the channel, scarred veterans beside newly launched destroyers. The smell of burning fuel is replaced by the rhythmic clang of hammers, the hiss of torches, the shouts of crews preparing to sail west again. Beneath the surface, divers still toil. The West Virginia and California have been raised and towed to dry dock. Inside the West Virginia's hull, workers find handprints on the bulkheads, traces of the sailors who'd survived the explosion only to be trapped within. A few tools remain beside them, rusted, silent testimony to their final hours. Chaplains conduct services on deck as the ships are rededicated. One places his hand on the scorched railing. "You will fight again," he says softly. And they will. Both ships will return to battle 2 years later, at Leyte Gulf. For those who survived the attack, The scars are deeper. Chief Petty Officer John Finn, who manned a machine gun at Caneo Bay despite being wounded 21 times, is awarded the Medal of Honor, the first of World War II. He downplays it in interviews. "I was just mad as hell they were shooting at us." Families of the fallen gather at temporary cemeteries near Honolulu. Mothers touch the small wooden crosses marked only with numbers. Some receive telegrams months late, their words mechanical but devastating. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your son has been lost in the performance of his duty and in the service of his country. Back on the mainland, "Remember Pearl Harbor" has become a rallying cry. It adorns posters, pins, and songs. At ball games, crowds rise to sing "God Bless America." Children collect scrap metal. Entire towns adopt warships, sending care packages and letters. In the Pacific, the war grinds onward. American forces push slowly through the Solomon Islands, fighting on Guadalcanal in brutal jungle conditions. Many of the men who had been at Pearl Harbor now find themselves back in the fight, seeking redemption in every battle. The Japanese, though stunned by Midway, continue to resist fiercely. Admiral Yamamoto, still commanding the combined fleet, knows the tide is turning. In April 1943, U.S. codebreakers intercept his flight plan. American P-38 fighters ambush his transport over Bougainville. Yamamoto's plane crashes into the jungle, his body found still clutching his sword. The architect of Pearl Harbor is dead. When news of his death reaches American crews, some quietly salute. Others simply stare into the distance. The war is far from over, but justice in some form feels closer. By 1943, Pearl Harbor is again a mighty base. Fleets depart daily, carriers, cruisers, submarines, heading west toward the Mariana Islands and the Philippines. The docks echo with the sound of engines and farewells. Sailors wave to nurses and factory girls as bands play "Anchors Aweigh." Yet amid all the motion, the Arizona remains, blackened, half-sunken, unmoving. Oil still seeps from her hull, forming rainbow sheens on the surface. Locals call it the tears of the Arizona. Each day, a few more bubbles rise, a quiet reminder of the men who still rest below. On December 7, 1943, exactly 2 years after the attack, survivors gather on Ford Island. They stand in crisp uniforms, some with missing limbs, some with medals glinting in the sun. A Navy chaplain steps forward. "2 years ago, we stood here in smoke and ruin. We swore we would never forget. We have not. We fight on, not for vengeance, but for peace." A bugler plays taps. The notes echo across the harbor, over the ships, across the quiet water to the rusting hulls beyond. In Washington, war planners meet late into the night. The strategy is clear now, island by island. Japan will be pushed back, all the way to Tokyo. The long road to victory has begun, and Pearl Harbor is once again the beating heart of America's Pacific War. The clock struck 12:30 a.m. on March 10, 1945. The city of Tokyo was no longer dark, it was alive with fire. Within minutes of the first wave, the carefully planned grid of the capital collapsed into chaos. Napalm-filled bomblets burst open upon impact, each scattering streams of flaming jellied gasoline that clung to wood, paper, and flesh alike. Entire neighborhoods ignited like dry leaves. On the ground, the wind began to turn. A mild southern breeze shifted into a roaring gale as the fires fed on oxygen, drawing in more air, creating what witnesses would later describe as a fire tornado. From the Asakusa District Dakota Ward, the inferno spread faster than anyone could flee. Wooden houses built close, with tatami floors and paper walls, went up in seconds. Power lines fell. The streets turned red with embers and molten metal. In a narrow alley off Kototoi Bridge, a mother clutched her infant as sparks rained from the sky. Her husband, his clothes burning, shouted above the wind, "To the river! Run to the river!" The Sumida River glimmered like a silver vein through the dark, a desperate line of hope. Hundreds rushed toward it, carrying what little they could. A photograph, a rice bowl, a child. The bridges were choked with people. As incendiaries fell closer, the wooden planks beneath their feet caught fire. Screams mixed with the hiss of boiling water as flaming debris crashed into the current. Many leapt into the river, believing it would save them, only to be trapped by the heat that sucked the air away. Survivor accounts later recalled that the fire followed us into the water. The temperature rose so high that oxygen vanished. Those who lived remembered the smell of burning tatami, oil, and human hair, a scent that would never leave them. From the air inside the B-29 Lucky Lady, radio operator Sergeant Henry Miller could see Tokyo glowing below like a furnace. "Christ!" he whispered, pressing his face to the plexiglass. "It's all fire, no anti-aircraft guns, no interceptors." The Japanese air defenses had collapsed under the sheer weight of the attack. What the crew saw was beyond imagination. An entire capital city turned into a sea of flame, smoke rising 30,000 feet into the night sky. Major Robert Morgan, aboard another superfortress, wrote in his mission log, "At 5,000 feet, the smell of burning wood and oil filled the cockpit. The glow was so bright we could read our instruments without lamps." The bombers wheeled away one by one, their bellies empty, engines humming steadily back toward Saipan. Behind them, Tokyo burned, block after block consumed. Below, the ground itself became unrecognizable. Streets warped in the heat. Trams melted into twisted frames. Roof tiles exploded from pressure. Entire families lay motionless in canals, arms still linked together. Firefighting units, the Kiboden, tried to form human chains with buckets, but the flames leapt entire avenues in seconds. Hoses hissed uselessly. The water boiled away before touching the wood. At the Honjo district, a policeman shouted orders until his voice was gone. "Keep to the open ground! Don't breathe the smoke." But his men had vanished in the black rain of ash. By 2:30 a.m., the city center had become a vortex, a superheated storm where wind speeds reached 100 miles per hour. Roofs were torn off. Entire blocks lifted in the updraft, carried like burning sails. An American observer later described it in simple terms. It was like watching the earth open up and swallow a city. In those hours, Tokyo ceased to be a city and became a grave. The firestorm raged for nearly 3 hours before the fuel finally ran out. When dawn approached, a strange silence fell, broken only by the crackle of smoldering beams and the soft hiss of rain beginning to fall. The survivors emerged from the rivers and shelters like ghosts, clothes burned away, faces blackened with soot. They wandered among the ruins, calling names that would never be answered. And from 7,000 feet above, the final American bombers turned east, their engines fading into the morning light. Below them, 16 square miles of Tokyo were gone. The largest city in Asia had been erased in a single night. At first light, a gray haze hung over Tokyo. Not fog, but smoke. It rose from the smoldering remains of what had been one of the world's largest cities. The air was still, heavy, and bitter. Ash floated through the dawn like falling snow. American reconnaissance planes flew overhead at 7 a.m., photographing the results. The city below was gone. From above, the outline of Tokyo resembled a map drawn in charcoal, streets visible only as faint lines between endless stretches of ruin. What the cameras recorded that morning would later shock even the planners of the raid. 16 square miles of the capital lay in black ruin. Over 100,000 people were dead, most of them civilians. 1 million more were homeless. Down on the ground, the survivors moved like shadows. In Asakusa, a boy of 12 searched among the ruins of his home. His school uniform was burned away to tatters. He found the family altar, cracked in half, and beside it the melted frame of his father's bicycle. He picked up the twisted metal, stared for a long time, then walked on through the ash. At the Sumida River, the water still steamed. The bridges were black skeletons. Soldiers and volunteers moved through the banks, covering bodies with white cloth. There were too many to count. Japanese police reports that day would mark the bodies simply as unknown. Entire districts had ceased to exist. Kodo, Hanjo, Fukagawa, Shidamachi, places whose names would soon be spoken only in memory. Inside the imperial palace, Emperor Hirohito was briefed on the devastation. Witnesses recalled his quiet shock. For the first time, Tokyo itself, not a distant battlefield, had been struck with overwhelming force. Prime Minister Kuniaki Koiso's government had already fallen weeks earlier. The new cabinet under Admiral Kentaro Suzuki now faced an impossible reality. Japan's capital was defenseless. Despite this, radio broadcasts that morning spoke only of an air raid of considerable intensity. No numbers, no acknowledgement of scale. The truth would take days to surface. But for those walking through the ruins, the truth was everywhere, in the melted coins, the charred rice bowls, the faces turned to the sky. In Saipan, the B-29 crews landed just after dawn. Their planes were blackened with soot. Mechanics swarmed over the aircraft, checking for damage, but few spoke. Major General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 21 Bomber Command, stood by the runway, silent. The reports came in. 279 aircraft had returned. Only 14 were lost. A devastatingly low loss rate. Militarily, the mission was a success beyond expectation. LeMay had done what few thought possible, crippled the enemy's capital without nuclear weapons. But among the crews, the mood was uneasy. Some wrote in their mission logs about what they'd seen. The fires joined into one. It was like watching hell itself move. We could smell it through the fuselage. Moral weight of the mission settled slowly, too heavy for one night to carry. Back in Tokyo, at dawn, rescue teams moved through the debris with carts and buckets. The smell of smoke and death lingered for days. Survivors gathered in parks and open lots, huddling under makeshift shelters of burned tin and canvas. A mother wept over a pile of ashes, clutching a child's sandal. Nearby, a Shinto priest prayed before a melted shrine. Even the imperial palace grounds were blanketed in soot. Across the moat, the charred remains of the city stretched endlessly, black on black, with no movement, no sound but the wind. The official casualty reports would take weeks to complete. But in the end, even the government could not disguise the numbers. Over 100,000 dead, 40,000 injured, 1 million homeless. The deadliest air raid in human history. At morning, a single phrase began circulating quietly among the survivors. This is what it means to lose a war. And though they could not yet know it, the fires of Tokyo were only the beginning. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, all would burn in the months to come. By summer, Japan's cities would be ashes. And by August, the world itself would stand on the edge of a new kind of destruction, one that would make even Tokyo's night of fire seem small by comparison. Spring 1945. The Empire of Japan was burning itself out. After Tokyo, the American B-29 raid spread like a tide across the home islands. Kobe, Nagoya, Osaka. Each night, another city vanished beneath fire. The tactics refined over Tokyo became the blueprint: low altitude, night bombing, and clusters of napalm bomblets. The Japanese air defenses, already crippled by fuel shortages and lack of trained pilots, could do little. Radar stations fell silent as power plants were destroyed. Anti-aircraft crews fired blindly into the smoke. By June, 40% of Japan's urban area lay in ruin. Millions were displaced. The government struggled to maintain order. Railways stopped running. Food was scarce. The empire, once stretching across Asia, was shrinking into a circle of fire. In the underground bunkers of the imperial palace, ministers debated the unthinkable: surrender. But even then, the Army High Command refused. They believed that the United States would eventually agree to negotiate if Japan could inflict heavy casualties during an invasion of the home islands. While cities burned, the military continued training civilians, old men, women and children, to defend the coastlines with bamboo spears. Posters read, "100 million will die for the emperor." Still, the nightly fires could not be ignored. When the B-29s appeared, the sirens wailed, and entire towns disappeared beneath the glare of magnesium and napalm. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, General Curtis LeMay refined his strategy with cold precision. He knew that Japan's war production was dispersed through thousands of small workshops hidden among civilian districts. Destroying those meant destroying the neighborhoods themselves. "If we lose," LeMay said, "we'll be tried as war criminals. But if we win, history will judge differently." The destruction of Tokyo had proven the effectiveness of fire. But it had also raised a terrible question. How far was humanity willing to go to end the war? That question would soon find its answer, not in firestorms, but in something even more absolute. In July 1945, as Japan's cities lay in ashes, an American team tested a new kind of bomb in the desert of New Mexico. The explosion was unlike anything the world had ever seen, a blinding light that turned sand into glass. The atomic age had begun. A few weeks later, the Potsdam Declaration was issued. It demanded Japan's unconditional surrender or prompt and utter destruction. Tokyo's leaders hesitated. Then, on August 6, 1945, a single B-29 named Enola Gay dropped one bomb over Hiroshima. 3 days later, another fell over Nagasaki. The destruction of Tokyo, once the deadliest air raid in history, was now overshadowed by a new weapon that annihilated cities in seconds. In the aftermath, Emperor Hirohito broke centuries of imperial silence. On August 15, his voice reached the Japanese people by radio for the first time. "We have decided to effect a settlement of the present situation. By enduring the unendurable, Japan surrendered." World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, was over. Yet the memory of that night in March 1945 never faded. For those who lived through it, the smell of burning wood, the sound of the wind, the sight of the sky on fire, these became scars carried for a lifetime. Historians would later describe the Tokyo firebombing as both a strategic necessity and a human tragedy, a moment when technology and total war reached their darkest union. More than 100,000 civilians had died in one night. More than Hiroshima. More than Nagasaki. And yet, it would be remembered quietly, without monuments, without trials. In the ashes of Tokyo, the modern world was born. A world where cities could be destroyed not in days, but in moments.